Hey, today I'm here with Keith Klain. Keith is the CEO of Doran Jones, a technology consulting firm in New York. Keith, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm great. So tell me a little bit about Doran Jones and the work you're doing there.
Sure. So Doran Jones, as you mentioned, is a technology consulting firm based in New York. We specialize in agile development and context-driven testing, software testing. We are based in our new facility that we've built out in the Bronx, and we work with what I categorize as enterprise IT organizations. So these are non-technical firms that build technology. So that's banks, insurance companies, and large enterprise operations like that. So we help people build and test software that they either buy themselves or are building in-house.
And talk to me a little bit about your career path because you've been at UBS and Citi and Barclays. Tell me a bit about how you kind of grew your career through the financial services industry.
Right. So I have, as a lot of people in software testing do, a kind of varied background in terms of getting into tech at all. And then as well, my career as I've progressed kind of through the technology consulting ranks into where I'm at today. So I actually have an art history degree and got into technology through a friend, a good friend of mine who's actually still working at the Gap right now as one of their heads of technology in the West Coast and Japan, and got asked to help test a inventory management system for a retail operation. I knew I was into technology, didn't know a lot about testing, but I was suddenly thrust into help us make sure this thing works kind of mode. Then got after doing that for a while, got into a proper consulting job with a company at the time that was called Spherion, and they actually had a proper career path for software testers. So they had a structured methodology. They had a big, thick manual. You had to take their SQM classes. I actually got my, this is going to, again, aside from my looks, going to show my age, I got my Windrunner certification. So I started out as a test analyst, test engineer, worked my way up through a test lead, test manager, and got I always what's underpinned a lot of my career is what I call just being kind of a dyed-in-the-wool opportunist. So every time I got an opportunity to do something more or different, I just went for it. And I like that Richard Branson quote: "If somebody asks if you can do a job, say yes, and then figure it out afterwards." So I got asked to go to the UK and help start up their software testing practice there, which with Sperion, and having never been to London, just took the opportunity and moved. So it was a great opportunity to learn not just how software testing works in an international context. I started, it was year 2000, it was 99 the first year I went, as a test manager for a year 2000 project in a bank. So that really started off my financial services career in anger. But I also learned kind of the guts of how a software testing practice works from a business perspective, and that's also been one of the things that I feel like I go on and on and on about in the software testing world. Is that through that I learned a lot of how to approach software testing as a commercial engagement, that it needs to be tied into business objectives and how to align those things together. Because I think if one thing as a software testing community we fall down on a lot is that we don't align the commercial proposition of software testing to the business. And I think that is why we don't have more senior managers in test. We don't have a lot of even more traditional business folks in technology that have a testing background. And I think we tend to focus on the wrong things quite a bit in testing. So from there, I just kind of worked through a couple different organizations, joined UBS as their head of testing for their equities department, took for that for about 5 years or so. Then worked at the Citigroup for a couple years on a regulatory project, and then joined Barclays to head up their software testing program and at the as the head of the global test center for them out in Singapore. I've traveled quite a bit, sent up a few. I've probably spent over 2 years of my life in India just through travel, setting up testing or outsourcing centers there. And then in November 2013, I quit my job at Barclays to join Doran Jones as a partner and as co-CEO, and here we are today.
Great, great. Uh, just curious, the art history degree. I mean, what did you take from the art history degree that maybe has helped you throughout your career?
Well, I think when you have a liberal arts degree, you either are going to teach or you have to get a real job.
Right.
So I think being the first kid in my family to go to college, other than my mom, I have a very a drive about being successful. And I think, to answer your question, what I took from it, and actually I found is very well suited, and a good friend of mine actually, who works at the Smart Bear, Lorinda Brandon, also has an art history degree, and she runs part of their API business there. So I think what I've drawn a lot from it is to look at problems creatively. And I think that's really kind of at the heart of innovation. And one of the things that I like about the context-driven testing community is that we ask a lot of questions and we look at things kind of laterally and we look at things differently and constantly reevaluating why we do things. So my experience has been that a lot of people who have just straight technology degrees look at things in a very serial way. It's problem solving and it's building things, but I think having a different approach and a different way of looking at problems has helped me a lot actually, and is not made me too focused on the technology. And I think that might sound bizarre working in a technology field, but you can get so lost in the weeds with technology, you're not reassessing why we're building things, not necessarily, and what we're building, as opposed to just focusing on how do we actually build it.
Right. That's great. Now, you've been in testing for a long time. A lot of changes have happened. What are some of the big changes that you've seen in testing in recent years?
Well, I think the hot topics, something like agile testing. Some of it, and it's probably my cynicism and been around for a while. Having seen, first it was rapid application development. Then it was dynamic system development methodology. Then it was extreme programming. Then it was the rational unified process. And albeit all those different methods of producing software have their merits and have probably contributed to things over time, in my context, which is building and testing software in large enterprise organizations, what I've continually seen it being used as is an excuse to try and cut testing, and to be real specific, cut testing in regards to having less testers, people identifying or designated as testers, which I think over time doesn't really get the results that people are looking for. So I see a lot of that in the world that I live in, is that agile. And I love, like, one company we've worked with came up with the term WAGile. So they have like a bit of waterfall, a bit of agile, and what people are looking for is, how do we build quality software faster, more cost effectively? And what that because a lot of the organizations are so engineering centric, they tend to look at the technology and the techniques and tools being used to help deliver that. And I always find, I've said this probably at every organization that I've worked at, for organizations that their entire reason for being is to build and deliver software, we spend so little time talking about how we're actually doing that. We get straight into the details of, we want to use these tools, we want to use these techniques, we want to use these bits and pieces of technology. We don't talk about, are we asking the right questions? Are we solving the right problem? And one of the things I like about the agile world is that there is a refocus on, are we solving the right problem? I like the idea of a minimum viable product that is solving a problem. We iterate on that. So I've seen, in the agile world, again, I don't think testing has changed, and I think a lot of what I like to see, and hopefully some of the influence of the context-driven testing community, is that there's a refocus on what testing actually is, not big VV&T models with the QA army, and we're just trying to go for like these very expensive coverage models. I think the idea of like what information are we trying to find out? How do we go about getting that information, and let that information be the mission of testing, and let that be what's driving. So sometimes, and Mark Tomlinson's a great person to talk about on performance testing side. He wants to know, what question are we trying to answer? And that tool might be a big third-party performance testing suite we need to buy, or it might be a stopwatch. There's lots of ways to ask to get the information that we want. So I see big changes for me. There's obviously a trend towards wanting testers to code. I think that's kind of been swept up in a lot of the teach your Nan to code. There's this big wave of we're going to solve all our problems in the world by teaching people how to code. I think I'd like to solve problems through creative problem solving and teach people how to think critically about what they do first, and then see if coding's the answer. I think that debate is kind of ongoing. So there seems to be a lot more, particularly with the explosion in the app world of continuous integration, continuous deployment. Testers in those contexts are developers, and which is great, because I think in a way I don't mind this being reframed as developers should do more testing of their own work, their own ideas. But I think that's probably one of the biggest changes I've seen. If you look at the outsourced testing market, it still grows year after year after year. The outsourcing side goes year after, it just grows year and year, because with all the pervasive software in our lives, people have to make sure the stuff works. So I think the debate's changing. I think it's changing in a positive way in some senses.